again, I always forget this one, should come on automatically. It should, but it doesn't. Once again, thanks, councillors and mayor, for taking this extra meeting, and planning staff and everything like that. We are certainly have a few people yet to deal with, and there may be some that come forward yet too. I would like to remind everyone that our meetings are web streamed and televised. From those in attendance, I would ask that you ensure your phones are on silent mode. This is a special meeting to address the OP review. Due to this being a special meeting, no other business outside of the OP review will be considered at this meeting. As you can see in the package before us, we have a proposed order of business to assist us today. Periodically, this is a tough one. We would be opening the floor to any members of the public in attendance who desire to speak. A reminder is that this hasn't been officially advertised as a public meeting under the Planning Act, so although we have opened the floor to people, this is not a public meeting, or a public hearing, I should say. I am recommending that we hear from staff and any members of the public desiring to speak to a specific issue prior to debating or placing any motions on the floor. The other thing that I would suggest to all of the speakers that will be coming forward, please be concise. Planning staff, we'll talk about that a little bit as well, but long speeches won't get us very far, so be precise and tell us exactly what it is that you want, and then we can move forward. May I have a mover to approve the agenda as presented? Mayor Luke. All those in favor? No. No? I'd like to speak to it, please. Okay.
Oh, no. Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I was going to raise it as a point of order, but I do have a concern with this agenda, and I'd like to ask either get a ruling from you or planning staff and their comments. But I've always wondered, at what point is this an actual bona fide review of the 5-year official plan, or is it really a development planning application? So there is a distinction, and it seems to me that some of these things that come here in this venue should be forwarded to staff for a full development application. So, and I'm suggesting that some of the ones that are in this agenda should be sent to staff and should not be part of a 5-year review. That's my question. That's what I'm thinking. Where is the line between considering bona fide development applications and 5-year official plan review? Because the official plan review should encompass official plans of all of Norfolk County, to me, clean up and that type of thing. So I'm wondering if really this should be redirected someplace else.
Planning staff, do you have anything you want to say? And then I'll talk to the clerk.
Through the chair to the council and committee, certainly there's a terms of reference for the official plan review that outlines what we're going to cover. And it did, in fact, outline some things that we were not going to look at. For the most part, updating, making minor adjustments here and there certainly is within the purview of an official plan review. And where special studies were done, such as the housing study, there's definitely an amendment that is in order for that. When it comes to specific requests, sometimes they're minor in nature. They can be supported, and it doesn't really take a lot more time to add them. But sometimes when you look at a submission, it maybe needs more justification, it needs more review, it needs the sorts of things that go on through a planning application. And there are at least one today that would be staff's position. So when we get to that, we'll certainly point it out. Others, you may be of the opinion that you also think should go through that review, but I'll leave it to you to decide.
Chairman, having heard what planning staff have said, I guess maybe I'll just retract my point of order and concur with the new agenda and go along and deal with it at the appropriate time.
Okay, thank you. Okay, all those in favor? That is carried. Ms. Dusling, do you have any introductions for us?
Yes, thank you. First and foremost, I'd like to say thank you to Council for making the time specifically today to talk about the official plan review. We know from the June 6th meeting there were some discussions and questions about the urgency of completing today's activities and getting a draft of the official plan review to MMH to review. And it should be noted to Council that costs and project time are coming to an end for the official plan review. We are now originally over our timelines, and there's also only so much consulting fees left in this project. Also, there are various businesses and residents waiting patiently for the policy changes that are hopefully moving forward and going to be in effect. And these include things like Scott's Industries and Titan Trailers, garden suites, our surplus farm dwelling severance date change, accessibility, and open road allowance policies, boundary adjustments, safe access, and on-farm diversification. We do have an order of business today, and that's on the peach kind of sheets in front of you. We have received some additional materials, but we'd like to start first and foremost with River Drive, and Matt's going to be providing some comments on that. Then we'd like to move to the Hamlet review, which Matt has a presentation to overview the hamlets, and then we're anticipating that we'd move into the deputations from Mr. Rowe and others, including Tom Klein's information that's in the packages. And we would ask the chair if it's possible to have an opportunity for our consultant to respond to each hamlet deputation, because in many events, staff and the consultant agree with the recommendations, and it may make today's meeting more efficient if there's an opportunity for Matt to comment at the end of each one. Then we'd like to move forward with the unfinished business from not June 19th, but June 6th, and the shoreline hazard policy, which Mary will be presenting on. And then if there's any other comments from council or deputations, and then finally moving to the submission, which is under additional materials from Candice Lushiti. I hope I have that right. And then Mary to outline some next steps. So we do have our GIS system on your council screens today, so we're hopeful that we can utilize that for any questions or visual opportunities. And then we're also here for any questions and professional opinions throughout your discussion. And we are very much hoping that by the end of the day, we could have a resolution to move forward to MMH for their review. So that's our hope by the end of today.
Okay.
Thank you.
The only other problem I have, if we're not done by 6, Councillor Wells will have to take over because he's next in line. So hopefully we will be done by then. Okay. Thank you. Rather than ask questions in relation to the introduction, I think we could just proceed to the first matter before us, River Drive. Matt Reiner, are you presenting this matter? No one here? Go ahead.
I think this is the first item in your agenda package on River Road in Port Dover. This is a request or an issue that had been dealt with at the Ontario Municipal Board a few years ago when with the, I think my understanding is with the comprehensive zoning bylaw, there is an appeal about marine and marine industrial zoning on River Drive, and the property owners in that area did not want, were opposed to that zoning, and what has happened instead is that there's a commercial marine zoning on River Drive, and the solution we've come to is in the official plan. there's a special policy area, and there's a marine industrial priority area on River Drive, but that no longer reflects the zoning on that property, and there is no industrial zoning along River Drive. So we've agreed that we would take that marine industrial priority area off of River Drive. It's no longer appropriate, and that addresses the concern that the Ms. Matthews had on the official plan policy there, that her concern was the official plan policy at this point does not correspond with the zoning bylaw. So we've agreed to rectify that issue. The only other point that I would make in that, in terms of reviewing the urban waterfront policies relating to development in that area, that it should also reference the special policy area for that area, which is Lynn. I forget the name of the area. It's the Lynn Creek and Lynn River and Black Creek area. That special policy area should also be referred to in the urban waterfront policy, and that would be
Councillor Wells?
That's it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I think I heard Matt correctly when he said that basically the staff are recommending that we do away with marine industrial priority area and replace it with what was there before, which is marine, commercial marine, which was what Ms. Matthews was asking. Did I hear that correctly?
A commercial marine reflects it refers to the zoning bylaw. This area is in the special policy area 3524, Lynn River, Black Creek, and that allows a number of forms of development in that special area around the waterfront, including marine commercial.
Thank you.
So we're, I think, applying with that.
Mr. Chair, do you need a mover to accept that recommendation, or we just leave it the way it is? How do they wish to do this?
Okay, go ahead.
Through the chair, the actual motion, if I could, would be to remove the marine industrial priority area from the current figure 1 in the urban waterfront designation.
If that's the case, I would move that, Mr.
Okay,
Chair.
I have a couple more speakers as the clerk is actually typing it up, and I'll have it read then. Councillor Brunton.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'm not clear. I'm looking at the map. Where is the piece of land on here? I'm not sure what piece we're looking at. Okay.
Go ahead.
Through the chair, I'll try and point it out here with it's this area right in here with the pointer. So it doesn't show on our GIS because it's a figure within the plan that this area plus, if I could, this area here, and then of course the marina down here. These are all urban waterfront marine industrial priority areas and figure 1 in the current official plan.
And they've never been, and you say they're not industrial marine no longer. Am I right? Is that the way I understood it?
So it's just the part on River Drive. So this went to an Ontario Municipal Board hearing. Peggy Scruton took this to the board, and this part up here she had asked, so there'd be 3 areas that were marine industrial priority areas in policy. And what these residents of River Drive did was when we did the zoning bylaw, they had the zone not MM, so marine industrial, on River Drive. And so what they're asking us now to do is change the official plan so it's consistent with what they achieved in the zoning bylaw by just taking that marine industrial priority area from Figure 2 off of this area right here.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't sure where it was.
Councillor Oliver?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do you want us to stand? I know my colleagues did. Is that
No,
what's protocol for
this
today?
is committee.
That's what okay, thanks. So I'll stay seated. Thank you. And apologize to staff for having my back to them. Mr. Chair, I think through Councillor Brunton's question and Mary's response, I think my issue has been resolved. I know Ms. Matthews, on behalf of a number of, quote, homeowners and property owners along that east side, they had their priority and we went along with it, and I understand this will just make the OP consistent with what we did for them. And I recall Ms. Scruton, who then appealed to the board because she had some concerns, not so much with their little piece, but with some of the rest of that. Can staff just reassure me and therefore council that neither group on either side of this issue will have a problem with what we're about to approve this afternoon?
Through the chair, Peggy withdrew her appeal, and she's now deceased, so there won't be any other
Or any other representative was my point.
Unless some of her family comes forward, but I've heard nothing from them.
Okay, thank you.
Further? Mr. Clerk, can you read the motion, please?
I might need assistance again, but and I would suggest as well that we open the floor to the public before passing anything.
Okay.
That the marine industrial priority area be removed from area figure 1 in the marine industrial area.
So is there anybody who wants to speak under, as far as the River Drive? There are none? Are we going to make what motion specifically do you need?
Through the chair, that is the urban waterfront, not marine industrial. It's the urban
Okay.
waterfront designation.
It's a different one. Okay. So we're dealing with the waterfront then, is that correct? Okay. Does that motion make what what you wanted?
That the marine industrial priority area be removed from area figure 1 in the urban waterfront designation.
Questions or comments from staff? Mayor Luke?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and certainly Ms. Matthews has been on top of this issue and been corresponding regularly with our planning staff, and they certainly have responded at every request to see this brought to this table. It's here. I am confident that what is before us, if supported, will more than satisfy Ms. Matthews. I'm certain of that. Thank you.
All those in favor? That is carried. Moving on to Hamlet review. Mr. Rowe, I think you have a number here that you want to talk about. Sorry? All right, go ahead.
It's my understanding that the residential land supply analysis report was circulated to council, as well as all of the, I think the 42 hamlet maps that showed the potential residential development in each of the hamlet areas. Just to start off, the methodology that I used in identifying the potential development in each of the hamlets was, the starting point was the GIS mapping that was provided by the county, and which identified vacant lands within each of the hamlet boundaries, and also the zoning of the lands. Vacant properties that did not meet the minimum zoning bylaw, lot area, and frontage requirements were excluded, so they were not considered as potential development lands. Also not included were vacant lands that may have been designated for another purpose, such as institutional, industrial, or hamlet commercial type uses. Even though the hamlet commercial designation does actually allow a single detached house, it still wasn't included. Also excluded were vacant lands that within the hamlet boundary that provided access to farm properties that were outside the hamlet, that occurred in a number of the hamlets, so that portion of the farm access area that within the hamlet but not built on was not included in the potential supply. Also not included were lands with the large hazard land or provincially significant wetland component. That was excluded except to the extent that the remaining portion of the land could be developed and would have access. For larger parcels in the hamlets where there's potential for a road to be constructed, the potential was determined by multiplying or reducing the land area by 25%, and that would be to accommodate internal roads and perhaps servicing that may be required. We used the hamlet zoning standard of 0.4 hectares per lot, which is roughly an acre. That's in the zoning bylaw, and that was used as the standard. Also not included was potential for garden suites or accessory residential dwelling units within the existing dwelling. Where the depth of the property did not allow for internal roads or even a cul-de-sac development, the estimated potential units was obtained by looking at measuring the frontage and applying the minimum lot frontage in the zoning bylaw. And the minimum lot frontage is 30 meters. On the residential monitoring report,
Councilors, are there any questions of the planner? Councilor Height.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to planning or the consultant. With your definition of hamlets, you came up with a figure that says there's 25 residential units that must be to be a hamlet. And who invented that figure?
Through the chair, that was established back in the early 70s. Dave Rowe probably remembers when, as part of the regional official plan, and when they were designating hamlets. There was also input from health unit and different ones at that point in time.
So we have the ability to change that then?
That's outside the scope of what we were doing for this official plan review. Certainly, if we were doing a hamlet study and wanted to look at changing some of those policies, we could.
Okay, I guess one of the problems that I have with that is I've gone over countless official plans in other municipalities, and not one of them have a 25-unit limit. And since this is the official plan review, I don't understand why we would have to have another study done to change something to that effect. Is this not the time to make changes to our official plan? Because that's why I'm sitting here today.
Go ahead.
Through the chair, sorry. Through the terms of reference, we didn't anticipate that moving forward. Again, very much the same as what Mary just answered. If there is a desire for council to have staff look at those policies, we can do that. Again, with time and resources, I think that may be appropriate. In some situations, there may be an opportunity, or it would be beneficial to have the residents of those hamlets involved in that study and those opportunities to speak, to keep things very transparent and open. And we would ask council to consider that.
And so how would we do that? And it would have to be done in conjunction with this official plan review, would it not?
Through you, the chair, again, I would suggest that it be done outside of the official plan review. After the official plan review project is done, we could look at a hamlet study. It could look at the configuration of the hamlets. It could look at size and scope of each hamlet, and also those policies of 25 dwellings or more.
Thank you for that. Through you again, Mr. Chair. Would that not take us to, I don't know, when, 2024 or something? Like, that's so far down the road. Because then it would have to be added into the next official plan.
Through you again, the chair. As council is aware, we do official plan review every 5 years. I would suggest that that study would come between the two so that we have some time and resources to look at those details. And then we can make an official plan amendment for all of the hamlets or be it for just some.
Okay, thank you for that.
Councilor Brunton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'm a little bit confused here. Can I, on all these, and I've read through most of them, the ones that we were sent with our agenda, but how many of these are we relocating the boundary of the hamlet?
So through you, the chair, the asks that we've received from the public and consultants vary. But the majority of them are very minor in nature, and those are things that we can consider under the official plan review. And we can go through those individually as the deputations and information arise.
Well, that's my point. You say we can move the boundaries, correct? That's what we're going to do on some of them, correct?
That decision is ultimately up to council. What we can provide is our recommendation as staff, but we are able to do minor adjustments.
Well, that's an opinion when it comes to minor, is it not? My question then is, if we can do that with a hamlet, why can't we move the urban boundaries on the urban areas? What's the difference? You know, like, and don't get me wrong, when I asked that question some time ago, you said, oh, no, we have to do a major study. And I think I just heard that again for Councillor Height, that you said, if we change the urban or the hamlet boundaries, we got to have a study done. Like, what's the point of doing a review right now if we want to change some of these things? I guess my real question is, can we legally change boundaries in this process? And if we can, let's get at it. If we can't, we're wasting our time.
Changing boundaries for hamlets or the urban areas is subject to the policies that are in the provincial policy statement. And the basic requirement is that there has to be a demonstrated need for the expansion. And another requirement is that where it impacts prime and agricultural lands, there has to be an assessment done to determine whether alternative areas have been looked at. And this is the expansion areas, the area with least impact, and there are no other alternatives to that. So the changes are, the boundary expansions are subject to the provincial policy statement, and I would anticipate that would be an issue that would be reviewed by the ministry when this plan gets submitted to the ministry. The work that I have done for industrial lands, commercial lands, residential lands has demonstrated to me that there is no need to expand urban boundaries at this time, whether it be hamlets or any of the urban areas. The only exceptions that I have supported had to do with industrial expansions, where existing industry, one was Scott's in Delhi, where it needed to expand. And outside of moving that plant, expansion onto agricultural land was the only alternative. The other one was Titan Manufacturing, that wanted to expand land on the east side of Cortland, and it actually amounted to the amount of land that was actually involved was insignificant and was really an infilling between two industrial designations. And for the purpose of supporting local industry, I felt that it's an important adjustment to make. So other than, I may as well say it now, in terms of reviewing all the hamlet requests that have come in, I think all of them involve expansion of the hamlet boundaries. The only one I think that I have least problem with is the one on Norfolk West, where really it's sort of it is essentially an infill issue. There's hamlet designation to the north and to the south and across the street. So it is essentially an infill situation. So I don't really have a problem with that one. But I think all the other ones do involve expansion of the hamlet boundaries. And the concern I have is if you allow one expansion, how do you justify not allowing others? And none of it can really be justified based on the needs analysis that I have carried out.
So what you're saying is if we either make this a short meeting or a long meeting, I guess. But I understand the housing report that we dealt with earlier, and you said there was no need. So I guess I'm getting mixed signals here. We're going to deal with all this stuff, and what you've just said is we don't need any additional housing. And I'm talking residential here.
Well, you didn't need additional housing, but there's enough land within the
That's right.
urban
Sorry.
areas that to accommodate. And I'm looking at a 20-year planning period to 2036. But this is something that needs to be reviewed on a regular basis. And I have recommendations for monitoring added in the official plan that you really have to monitor your residential land supply. I would suggest on a yearly basis, so you know exactly where you are at all times, and know when it may be appropriate to make adjustments.
Well, I'm not disputing what you're telling us. I'm a little bit confused because what Councillor Black just mentioned at the start of the meeting, and now staff are saying, well, they're minor, we can do some of the, I don't know, I guess I'll go along with the group. Thank you.
Councillor Height.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You'd mentioned the terms of reference that this review was based on. When was that done?
Through the chair, that was last revised December 2015.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, I guess you mentioned that you had provided us maps of the hamlets, but I guess what I was looking for was a before and after, because you've done a residential land supply, and when we saw the Villanova mapping, it showed that clearly there were some things that were in the boundary that will never be developed. And I'm not sure if we can see that online right now, because there should have been something that's enacted and then the proposed. Is that correct?
Through the chair, that it was very difficult to understand what you meant before and after. I think I sent an email asking for clarification and I didn't get it. So what we did was we sent you what the current boundaries are with the consultant's evaluation showing how many lots and how much potential there was within each lot, because that's the only mapping we have. If you're meaning mapping showing like Villanova from the June 6th meeting, no, we haven't had staff resources to go in and make an amended map for that in the time we've had.
Okay, I thought the before and after was pretty clear, but if not, that's not a problem. Now, I went through the housing study, and I'm unclear. It says that there's a total of 414 vacant lots, of which there were 94 lots that would have been rural lots, so 22.9 was the percentage point. So that leaves us 2.25 lots in a hamlet, if divided by the 42 hamlets. So you still think that there's not enough room for some hamlets to grow, and we're talking 2 houses for the next 20 years or something? Like, I feel that we're missing an opportunity here to let our hamlets finally thrive. And what we have, is it the province that's pushing down the mandate that they want to kill off the hamlets, or is it that our terms of reference didn't allow them to grow?
Go ahead. Matt?
A couple of points, just to, the hamlet supply is in Table 14 of the Residential Monitoring Report, and that also includes the rural areas of the county. So it's, what I identified was 610 lots of record in the hamlets and rural areas, of which 153 of the lots of record were actually in hamlets, and the remainder were in the rural areas. Lots of record that are in the agricultural areas, basically. Also, in the hamlets, there's an additional 462 lots that could be created by land severances or plans of subdivision, and rezonings, and that's within the current boundaries. So within the hamlets, really, there's 153 plus 462. That's just over 600 potential units in the hamlets. The forecasted supply or the demand, there's 2 numbers. The Hampson forecast, what was done for the county, estimated 250 lots over 20 years in the hamlets and rural areas. I did an alternative forecast that suggested that the need may be 800 units over that 20-year period. Now that's an estimation, and I think that kind of estimation should be reviewed every 5 years as new census data comes available. And I would point out that, and it's in the residential monitoring report, that that does represent even my estimation represents a decline in hamlet and rural development over what has been experienced over the past 15 years. And over the past 15 years, hamlet development or rural development was about 27% of all new housing units. And my forecast brings that down to about 15% of the total housing. So it does represent a shift from the development from the rural areas to the hamlet or to the urban areas. And part of what I think is pushing that is the provincial policy statement, because to accommodate more growth in any of the hamlets, you're in most cases impacting prime agricultural lands, and there has to be a demonstrated need to do that, and I don't think that is there at this point.
Okay, I've gone over the numbers for the Hemson study, and I don't necessarily agree with them. I feel that they're dated, because we know at council the development pressures we've experienced lately. Even the Waterford subdivision is 115 new homes coming online, and there's a lot of development things going on right now. Even our building inspection people will tell you that. So I don't know that I'm stuck on that idea. I feel that we're holding back development in hamlets that could really use those kind of houses to help build up and sustain our hamlets. Even the way we word it in our official plan, I just feel that it talks down to the hamlets. It's hamlet areas are settlements that function as small clusters providing limited institutional, recreational, and small-scale commercial services to the surrounding agricultural community. Like, I don't know, for me that's so old, when you could have something here that would be worded better, like, it is the intent of this plan to protect the county's hamlets as traditional rural service and commercial centers. Facilities and attractions in hamlets are part of the county's charm and tourism draw. Like, everything about the wording in this thing, it just seems to beat down on these hamlets. And I know over the last few years, you've seen the hamlets, they've been pretty stagnant, but I'm seeing growth out there now, and I'd like to promote the infilling of them, because the commercial buildings in our hamlets, they have been struggling for a long time. And some of them have closed down or gone to other uses, and we're not planning for anything like that. We seem to want to push everybody into the urban centers, but not everyone wants to go there. We have housing growth forecast that the rural community is growing 17.1%. And, you know, the second highest one is Port Dover at 23%. So there is a need, and the demand is there. But we're not only not going to address that, we're going to restrict it further. And I just don't find that to be good planning. So I'm not sure where we can sort this out.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think probably a way to sort that out would be through the Hamlet study that Pam talked about. I agree with the comment about the Hampton forecast being dated. That's why I did an alternative forecast, and that was based on the actual experience in Norfolk County over the last 15 years. So I took a look at that, and that's what the alternative forecast is based on. But I think it's the role of the hamlets and the potential development and expansion of the hamlets is probably something that warrants a specific study.
One last thing, Mr. Chair. You mentioned that there were these lots that exist out there and these plans of subdivisions and things like that. Is there a whole bunch of them that are based on like a 1946 plan of subdivision, like the Port Dover one that we just saw, where they're on a gravel road and would never have been approved if it wasn't for this council? Because that was 12 lots there that were probably tied up. So who knows out of these last batch how many were tied up, because the plans are from the 1950s and people have just given up on them.
To you, Mr. Chair, no, they're not based on those old plans. They're just based on vacant lands and basically assumed a new plan of subdivision, or they're based on existing lots of record that are out there today.
So how does one know if those existing lots are actually for sale? Because if nobody's selling them, nobody's building on them.
We don't know, but they are potential supply, and they have to be recognized as potential supply.
Councillor Oliver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I've got my head a little clearer now in light of Councillor Height's questions, and I appreciate that. Thank him for it. The documents that staff provided us prior to today's meeting, where it goes by each of the hamlets and identifies potential lots available, and it's all highlighted and it's very clear. Thank you for that. So I want to be sure then, I know Councillor Height at one point suggested to us there was a very limited supply of existing lots within hamlets. Matt has indicated it's in the hundreds, and as you flip through these maps, obviously I didn't add them all up, but I suspect that's where he comes up with potentially the hundreds. I just want to be sure then that this series of maps shows potential lots or existing lots within the current hamlet boundary for each one. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And so it does in fact represent hundreds potentially of lots still available within the existing hamlet boundaries, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question. The problem with what we're talking about here is, regardless, to try, and a lot of those are not going to be ever built on, because when you got to put in roads, you can't afford to do it. It's not like a subdivision. correct?
I assume that the larger parcels would involve roads. There's certainly one in Langton or several parcels in Langton that would involve the construction of a road, and I made allowance for the road within my estimation. So it's like anything else, even in the urban areas. It's the desires of the property owners to bring their land forward for development or for sale. But when the province, my experience with the province is when they look at potential supply, they look at the land that is available, and not whether it's currently for sale or not. It's land that is available and potentially can support housing development.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rowe, I think you want to have to speak to some of these.
Thank you very much for holding this meeting today. It's certainly a better forum than I think it was the other night. I brought with me my clients, and they'll also be available to answer questions that council may have, and maybe support me in a couple of the points. With regard to the comments made by the county's consultant as part of the process, there's two things. Number one, when you start using impact data to generate numbers of vacant parcels, one has to be very suspicious of them, because what happens is you can have an old plan that has put a number of lots. In all likelihood, it's held by one person, and the likelihood of it being developed or more than one or two lots is pretty slim, albeit it can show that you have 5 or 10 or 15 lots. So that part of the analysis is really, in fact, quite difficult. The other part, and I commend our consultant for going through the exercise that he did, but they get to what I would think the final stage, and they didn't look at, well, what is likely to be developed or what is desirable to be developed. And I made the reference last week, the other week, to Langton, where there's some fairly large properties that in theory could be developed. Well, they've been designated that way since probably 1980. Nothing has happened. And so the likelihood of development, even though they get counted every time as a potential, but the reality is they're not a potential, because the owner would have to, number one, wanted to be a developer, then would have to especially start building roads and doing that, in all likelihood wouldn't proceed. So this is the same happens in our urban boundaries. If we have a developer sitting on a large chunk of land, sitting on a large chunk of sewer water capacity, and they do nothing for 40 years, council has in the past said, fine, you're going to lose your designation, you're going to lose your capacity if you don't perform. You don't perform, it's gone. And I think that exercise needs to be also looked at in terms of the hamlets. So
I realize that, but we're dealing with hamlets right now.
But so anyway, we're dealing with hamlets, thank goodness. So I'm going to bring Derry Dudditch up. This is the property in Boston that we referred to at the last meeting, and Pam can identify the Jerry's property there. That's my little nifty. No, it doesn't have the capacity to do that. Anyway, that property which is shown on the screen. That's correct, Pam. You've got the right property. What had happened is it was part of I believe, a 5-lot plan subdivision, and only there was a triangular portion is located outside the settlement area boundary and wasn't included as part of the plan of subdivision in terms of the designation. Jerry would like to, it's quite a large parcel, create an additional building lot. Now, we did a hydrogeological study. It said that we had to have 1.2 acres to accommodate a traditional tile bed. However, if we were to go to a tertiary system, which are recognized by our building department and are recognized elsewhere, we could easily accommodate 2 building lots on the designated land. Planning staff have say they cannot support use of tertiary systems. They have their reasons, but what I can say is tertiary systems are used in Long Point and Turkey Point, and they're certainly used in other municipalities, and great strides have been made over the years to make the systems far more functional. All of Tim Hortons rural stores have gone on tertiary systems. So you figure if you can handle a Tim Hortons drive-through on a tertiary system, it works pretty well. Jerry, do you want to add a few points?
Yeah, well, the last piece, I got to tuck the mic, is just above the arrow. And the point of agricultural runs from the dark line across to the other corner, which represents about 2 acres. And the frontage, the whole property is 4.1 acres. And within the hamlet boundary, I could still create a 3/4 acre lot with a tertiary septic system, and I can bring the nitrates down below the 10 milligrams that they require to about 6. Of course, the planning department doesn't recognize it, but the building code would allow me to do it if it was created a lot. What I'm trying to do is just to straighten that lot out to give the planning department their 1.2 acres according to the soil conditions from the soil tests, and still retain 2.2 acres as another lot instead of a big 4-acre lot, because the agricultural land is all surrounded by houses and little pieces and bits and pieces. Because back when I was doing the subdivision, I knew that I couldn't touch that ag, so we designed the property for myself to build a home there. And of course, I was going to build like a 60 by 60 shop with the drainage. And I think in July of 2015, the bylaws changed where there's no longer big buildings allowed, like a big farm building of 60 by 60 on a piece of property under 5 acres. So all the planning I did on that 5 acres all went to side, because now I can't keep animals there because it would be in partial hamlet. It's not part of the hamlet, but you can't keep animals. I understand they're 5 acres. And that's why I'm just trying to incorporate that 2 acres of ag into the hamlet and allow me to make a 1.2 acre lot to put a traditional tile bed in.
Councillor Oliver, and then Councillor Brunton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a point of clarification, if I can.
Go ahead.
And I'm not sure whether you can help me or the clerk or who, but my recollection, Mr. Rowe made a comment that planning staff have indicated they don't support or can't support tertiary treatments. Mr. Chairman, it's my recollection that council several years ago, and I think it was perhaps in the context of our resort communities, I don't remember, it's irrelevant, but that council formally said, and did so by motion, I think, that tertiary sewage treatment systems that actually do reduce nitrates below levels that traditional systems do, and that require a smaller footprint, were acceptable. So I'm asking for a reaffirmation or somebody to confirm that we in fact did that as council. So I would suggest, and with the greatest of respect, it doesn't matter whether planning staff support it or not. It's something that I believe council has said, we recognize this technology is legitimate, it works if the system is maintained, And I understand there are means to ensure that the property owner must maintain the system, i.e. have it inspected by a professional, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that subject to those things, Mr. Chair, those tertiary treatments are, and I emphasize are, acceptable.
I can only
to the
say I
county.
remember us talking about
Yeah.
it, whether it ever took forward or what, I have no idea.
Well,
That
and maybe
maybe what
that's
we need to
something,
do is to
staff
find out.
may recall that I'm correct, or they may recall that I'm incorrect. I would stand to have them tell me, but I'm quite certain we as council have endorsed those technologies.
Lee, do you have a comment? There you go.
Through the chairman to council. You are correct. That was, council did historically pass a resolution that would permit that to be used in the county.
Okay.
Back to Mr. Rowe's point and his client, the issue of whether or not a tertiary system should be, is or isn't acceptable is a non-issue. So I don't know whether that changes your request or not, but
Yeah, if planning staff were to advise that we could use a tertiary system here, then we wouldn't push the hamlet expansion. So we would not. If